Welcome to the Pilgrim Tactics Lecture. In this video we're going to be talking about general strategies and tactics for the Pilgrim, survival skills, and whatever tips and advice I can give you to help you fly the Pilgrim better. Much of the advice is actually going to come in the narrated videos, so you can actually see what's happening and see how I handle the different situations. But this video is going to give you a good foundation of my general thinking about the ship, this along with the fitting video. So a couple of important notes before we get started. Almost all of the videos, if not all of the videos, PvP videos, are focused on nullsec PvP. I don't do much faction warfare PvP lately, and I haven't with the Pilgrim. If you're using a Pilgrim for faction warfare, it is possible. You may also want to consider the curse because of its ability to not be seen on D-scan. But I would probably just cloak a curse up in a very busy system, and a very busy faction warfare system inside a medium site, and then choose my targets wisely and always be ready to be blobbed, because it's going to happen at least 50% of the time. But that's enough for that. So let's talk about nullsec. One of the first things discussed in nullsec is just general survival strategies. So you want to stay alive. Now, from the fitting video you saw where I said that I prefer the shield fit over the armor fit for the simple reason it's faster, more agile, and therefore more survivable. When you charge a gate, jump into a camp and then charge a gate, you're more likely to survive if you're in the shield fit than the armor fit, because you're going to get to the gate faster. So let's talk about a gate camp. So let's use some amazing art ability here, and let's draw a gate. Okay, so there is your gate. Now you've got enemies. That was supposed to be an X. Enemies waiting for you on the other side, and you're jumping through. So when you jump through the gate, you've got to look. This is very much like the Stabber fleet issue. Look at where you are in relation to all these things. So the gate may be here, you're here, and then, well, let's do the right color here. Your enemies are all over here. So in this case, you may decide that the best route out of this is to burn in the way that takes you away from all of them. That's only if you think that you can cloak, micro warp drive, and then there's something over here generally in this area that you can warp to, a celestial, because you want to warp quickly. Now if there's a bubble, then things change. You can't warp through bubbles. So in general, the safest way to survive this situation, let's say you've jumped in and this is a saber and he pops a bubble. The others are frigates and cruisers and that kind of thing with whatever icons they have now, like triangles or something. And the best way to survive that is actually just to charge the gate. Charge the gate, and to do that, what you want to do is you want to hit approach, cloak, micro warp drive in that order. And you have to be very careful not to hit your cloak too fast or too slow, because a lot of times what will happen is you'll hit approach and then cloak, and then right up on the top of your screen you'll see a little box that says the cloaking you are doing is preventing your ship from cloaking, because you're still cloaked from your uncloak of being jumped into the system. So in order to prevent that, you've got to learn to give it about 1 whole second after you hit approach. But you have to really get it as perfect as you can, because even a half second extra uncloaked, if this is an insta-lock camp and these guys are sensor boosting a fast lock frigate or cruiser or something like that, or they have like an insta-lock sway pool, then a half second might be enough for him to lock you, then you can't cloak. But the key is approach, cloak, micro warp drive. Now another way to do that is to approach micro warp drive cloak, and that almost guarantees that your cloak will take, because the time it takes you to hit your micro warp drive, but your micro warp drive might not take. So in this one situation, no matter what ship you're in, if you're charging a gate or crashing a gate, whatever you want to call it, you want to make sure that the modules you turn on actually turn on, because they're notorious for not turning on the way they're supposed to. So now let's back this up a little bit, get rid of some of this junk. Alright, so that's the best way to escape a gate camp, is just to jump back through. And sometimes there are, I don't know if I have a video of it, I think I do, but there was one time where there was a fleet of roughly 8 to 10 people, and I had to keep jumping back and forth through the gate. They had 2 bubblers. I couldn't escape, so I had to just keep going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Well, eventually they lost interest to some degree, and eventually they all got aggroed mostly on one side, and I was able to burn off in the direction of, I think, a moon, and hit cloak, and they missed. Because what they'll do, if you try to move away, what they'll do is they will all look at where you cloaked, and there's a skill to that. Look at where you cloaked, and they will all, let's try to get better arrow there, charge that spot. Oftentimes they will also look at the direction and try to come to where you're going, not so much where you are. So they're going to try to decloak you. Ideally, when you do hit your approach here, you want to be approaching a belt or a sun or something like that. So it's much better to just hit a line and make sure that a line is away from them. A line, cloak, warp. If you're in a bubble, then it's usually best to charge back to the gate, unless you're bubbled on both sides and you just got to make a break for it. And then you just keep jumping back and forth until you see a good opportunity. Depending on the situation. Now, situationally, this can change quite a bit, and a lot of it's going to be experience. But in general, safest thing for you to do is run back to the gate. So now, that's how you would escape, is you either charge the gate, or you cloak, warp off, cloak, approach something, align to something until you can warp off. Make sure you get that micro warp drive cycle in there, because the micro warp drive, it doesn't get a speed penalty. So you're still going to accelerate up to beyond 1,000 meters a second for at least a little while. So you're going to cover a pretty decent distance during that cloak. Like for example here, let's say you are approaching the gate here, right? So you're approaching the gate, and what will happen a lot of the time is you will hit approach, cloak, micro warp drive, and then right about here, anywhere from 3 to 5K from the gate, you will get uncloaked. If your cycle is over, try to get in one more cycle of your micro warp drive. If you can't get in your cycle of your micro warp drive, you're close enough that you will probably just drift. You know, you'll probably just coast right into the gate to where you can then jump through. So that's another thing to keep in mind, is when you're approaching, if you get uncloaked, try to get in another micro warp drive cycle. And if you get uncloaked, you still probably can coast on in. Alright, so the next thing is, what if you want to fight this? So let's say we've got this, which is a saber. It's really hard to write with the mouse. And you've got this, which is an Inyo. I was doing that backwards. And this, which is another frigate, another frigate. Okay, so you've got 3 assault frigates and a saber. So in that case, or let's say this one's a crow right here. And this one is a raptor. Keep it Caldari. Alright, so saber, Inyo, raptor, crow. In that case, I would probably choose to fight this, but I wouldn't fight it by approaching. You have to keep in mind that the Pilgrim is, let's go back to black here, the Pilgrim, try to keep representing you as the Pilgrim as a circle, has certain safety ranges. I talked about this on the SFI, that there's like a circle, and that's 13K. So 13. Why did I do that? 113. There we go. I think I was trying to do the K before the 3. All right, 13 kilometers. That's 13 kilometers. That is roughly web range. So that's one danger zone. Then you've got just inside of that another danger zone, which is even more dangerous, of 9 kilometers. And that's the scram danger zone. But in reality, if they overloaded it, they could come out here to 11. I don't know if I can make that circle look right. But yeah. So that would be 11. So in general, you can completely ignore this internal stuff and say, this is pretty much kiting 101. Never allow anything within 13 kilometers of you. Okay? In general, anything that gets within 13 kilometers of you is a primary target for your newts. If it's within 13K, it can really put you in trouble. So let's go back to this example over here. You're running away. Now let's say that the crow manages to charge in and get a scram. Every second he has a scram means that the rest of the ships are approaching. And if all 4 of these ships have scrams, it's going to be virtually impossible to win that fight. Because once they all get on top of you, you're going to really struggle to kill them all before they're able to kill you. So the way we deal with this is, instead of running up and just running straight at them and brawling, there are probably some fits for the Pilgrim. Like, you could probably work out an ASB fit. Refer to the Shield Pro guide for that. But you could make up a quick ASB fit, and you could probably brawl these guys. But you're still, whenever you go up close to brawl, you are taking a big chance of being blobbed. That's why I prefer the Shield Kite Pilgrim. And basically what I would do in this situation is I would burn away. So I would burn in the direction that was the most away from these other guys. The worst thing you could do is burn across the gate straight through them. Because if you do that, you're guaranteed to get scrammed, or multiple scrammed. So you want to look at where they are. You want to hit align to something, or double click in space, and then shift click and click your micro warp drive. What that's going to do is it's going to overload. Shift clicks to prime to overload, and then click to start. You're going to get one overloaded cycle of your micro warp drive, which I forget off the top of my head how fast it is. I think it's 2,700 meters a second. Something like that. That's going to be faster than the Inyo, and as fast or faster than the Pilgrim, which means the only 2 things that are going to keep up with you are the Raptor and the Crow, at least at the beginning of the fight. So knowing that those 2 ships are the fastest ships, and also keeping in mind, like I said here, you prioritize based on range. So in this situation here, the target closest to you is the target that is the most dangerous in most cases. That's assuming they have a scram or a web. If they're coming that close to you, they probably do. But it's a good general rule. The closest they are, the closest target is the most dangerous target, and therefore the one that deserves a newt the most. Never use all 3 newts at once. You've got 3 energy neutralizers. You can use 2 really quickly to just nuke a frigate capacitor, but never use all 3 on the same target when there's multiple targets on the field. You have to leave something free, because it's a 12-second cycle for mediums, I'm pretty sure. It's a 12-second cycle. So 12 seconds, if you're locked into a cycle, means that you could get into some really serious trouble before that newt ends its cycle and you can cycle it to something else. So here's what I would do in this situation. I would burn, I would overload my first 2 or 3 cycles of my micro warp drive heading in this direction. As I'm going, the Raptor and the Crow are going to be coming hard and fast. They may even get a scram, but as soon as I get my ship going, my first priority is to get moving at speed. So overloaded micro warp drive, moving away from the enemy. My second priority is to lock the crow and the raptor. Once I've locked them both, I'm going to put one newt on each one of them. Then I'm going to lock the other two, depending on range. So keep that in mind. Range is still of some importance, because if the Inyo or the Saber was faster than I thought, and they happen to be 15K, 10K away from me, something like that, then I would certainly put a little bit of a focus on them. And if things went a little bit off plan and not according to plan, then what I would do is I would use a double newt. So what I would do is, let's say that the raptor shot in and got a scram, right? So he scrammed me. I would put 2 newts onto the raptor and 1 newt onto the crow. Then I would immediately turn off after the first cycle. So start and then stop 1 newt. Because 1 newt would have, the 2 newts at once would have killed his capacitor enough to drop any scram he got on me, as well as the single newt I left on him would keep his capacitor mostly dead. Now in those 12-second cycle, he's going to get enough capacitor to maybe get a surge of micro warp drive. But it's not going to be enough for him to keep up with me and really pose a good threat after that. So then I've got 1 newt free. So that newt is going to be reserved for whichever one of these other 2 targets is the closest. I'm going to continue moving, and once I've got my newts on targets, my next priority is, so first, priority 1, get moving fast away from your enemy. We're having a running fight. Priority 2, lock and newt the most dangerous and or the most closest targets. Priority 3, get drones out, the right drones. Try to choose your drones based on the target. For this case, I would start out with warriors, because warriors are acolytes. Because you need the speed to be able to really do damage to these 2 interceptors. If it was just an Inyo and a Saber, I would probably start out with infiltrators. Good heavy drones that are pretty general purpose. Saber's likely to have an EM hull. Inyo, not so much. We don't have any explosive drones, so the infiltrators would be good enough. So get moving, lock and newt, get your drones out and start your damage, and as well get your point. When you're putting your drones out, I usually make sure to get my point on something when I'm doing the newts, because I'm already there at the high slots. So that's when I focus on getting my point. But in this case of a running fight, don't worry if you lose point. Because if you lose point, if these guys are really smart, and this raptor right here decides, hey, I can see this guy is pointing me and trying to kill me, I'm going to run the opposite direction. If you've done something like keep at 20K on this raptor, it's going to drag you right back into the rest of the fleet and you're dead. So you don't want to do that. Instead, you want to keep moving in this direction here at all times until you have a very clear advantage in the fight. So let's say you've started, you did a double newt cycle on the raptor, a 1 newt cycle on the crow, and put 1 newt over here. Let's do it like this. 1 newt over here on the Saber. Inyo's slow, he's afterburner fit or something stupid. So you've got your drones out here killing the raptor. You kill the raptor. He probably dies not within point range, but out at like 30, 35K, which you'll see a lot in the videos. They just don't warp off. So he's dead. Your next target is the crow, because he's probably going to be the easiest to kill. At this point, once the raptor's down, and let's say the Inyo is far enough back to where he's not a big threat, at that point you can maybe consider stopping your moving away. Make sure you keep every target on the field neuted as well as possible, because your newts are not just to turn off their propulsion or their points or whatever. They're there to keep you in a situation where you can get away. So you'll see in many of the videos where I'm pointed, but I newt the target and warp off. So staying aligned is often very important. And then you just work your way through the targets. And once you see, like once I killed the raptor and the crow, I'd be fairly, and I still had, let's say, 3/4 of my shield. At that point, it's time to turn back in and go for that Saber. The Saber is high value, and usually not that tanky. Even a tanky saber's usually not more than 10k EHP, which if you're doing 400 DPS, that's what, 25 seconds? 25 seconds to kill him. And you'll be able to, now you'll have 2 targets down, so you have 3 newts at your disposal to pretty much remove anything from the field. Important note here is that if the Inyo, let's say that you went in on the saber, and the Inyo came in, and he grabbed you and got a scram. Inyos have active weapons, so in this case you'd be better off putting one newt on the saber and 2 on the Inyo. Now I'm about to clean up this big mess of a paint drawing here in a second, but before I do, I want to reiterate something that you'll hear a lot that's extremely important. Always stagger your newts. If you have 2 newts on a target, the ideal way to do it is to start your first cycle, wait 6 seconds, because that's half a cycle, and then start the second cycle, okay? So let's delete all this. Alright, so that's a running fight. That's, in general, one of the funnest fights you're going to get in this game, and by doing those types, or one of the funnest types of fights you're going to get in this ship, and those fights prepare you for other fights where it starts out as just you versus another person. Let's say you tackle a procurer in a mining anomaly, and all of a sudden other ships start coming in. Well, at that point you're in a running fight. Don't freak out and warp away. Start aligning to something, hit your microwarp drive. If needed, overload your microwarp drive and just start burning away and killing the tackle as they charge you. The fight's not over until the enemy leaves the field, right? So give them chances to make mistakes. So the next up is, the next topic is guerrilla harassment. So in my videos, you're going to see I spent time primarily in 2 pockets. One was in the EF pocket, which I forget the name of the people who lived there, but they really hated me. They're the people I talked about in some of my other videos, that they actually made a mailing list, and it was much to my amusement. They made a mailing list of how much they hate Abaddon 21, and they all would send mails back and forth saying how terrible I was and insults and stuff, because I just completely wreaked havoc on their lives. And maybe I'm taking too much credit, but their alliances pretty much crumbled, and this during the duration of the couple weeks to a month that I spent in their systems, where I don't know where they live now. They've either broken apart or moved across the game. So there's an EF, which is a system in Syndicate that it's a nice little pocket. So basically, just from memory, there's EF, then there's a side system that's an ice system, and then there's another system that's got a station and it's a good ratting system, and then there's like a 2 or 3, I think it's 2, a 2 system dead end with no stations, and then this would go out to the rest of Syndicate, and this would be EF here. So what I would do in a system like this, and you know what, I need to get, probably better if I could get a picture in here. Alright, so here's EF. I had to go into my browser and to .land to get the actual map here. So you've got your ice mining system here, DUV, GRNJ, which was kind of like their secondary home, and so you had the main group who lived here in EF. There's a second group who was allied to them that lived in GRNJ, and they spent time in the ice mining system as well as these back systems with no stations. They would do some ratting back here. So the whole idea of guerrilla harassment is that we want to disrupt the enemy's activities and cause as much damage as possible. Now, some people will look at it and say, well, to be effective, you measure your effectiveness based on how many ships you kill, the total ISK damage. And I think if you look at my time back here, because I was learning the Pilgrim and really perfecting it, so I think I lost 3 Pilgrims back in this pocket. as I was trying the different fits. I think I lost maybe half a bill, or maybe a bill, I don't know. But I did about 4 billion ISK in damage over the couple weeks or 3 or 4 weeks I spent here. I think that's it. It's been a while since I've looked at the numbers. But it's not so much the ISK damage that matters when you're in a pocket like this doing this kind of harassment. What really matters is the morale damage. So I had no problem with these people. I had no beef, no hatred, no dislike. They just happened to be a good group to focus on for this video, and that's all it was. And it's the same thing for the other one I did, J4LP. I went into their home system of 9GYL, I think it's called, and spent a lot of time there. It's a very similar system like this, except it's in Cloud Ring. But it's not anything personal. It's just because that's what I want to show, and that's something that I want to be able to teach. So this was a good place. I knew they spent a lot of time doing Care Bear activities, basically PvE, same thing with J4LP, that they spend the majority of their time mining and running anomalies and combat sites. So that's the perfect type of group that you can really cause some damage to, and you can really destroy their morale. So what I would do is a combination of things. For one, whenever I came into the system or logged on, first thing I would do would be to check the station. So I'd go look at the station here and see what was going on. And let's make that a little thicker. There we go. So I'd go look at the station. Oftentimes, you'd be surprised at how often you will find someone just sitting on the edge of a station, not docked, in a hauler or a miner or even a combat ship, just sitting there AFK because they had to run to the bathroom, they had to, somebody called them away from the computer, and they just hit dock or warp to station. And then when they got to station, there's a very well-known bug that's been there for a long time about that basically you hit dock and your ship warps to the station, and it just sits on the edge of the station and it never actually docks. So you can't just hit dock and then walk away and expect your ship to dock, because more often than not, when you walk away, it won't dock. It's like it knows. It doesn't know, but it seems as if whenever you do walk away, that's when it happens. Anyways, so check the stations. Next, whenever I would come into system, they would sound off their intel. And, in their intel channel and on their comms, they'd, Abaddon 21's here. Everybody, hostile ship in system. Get safe. Well, a lot of these guys were a little bit inexperienced. So for them, get safe. If they were here mining in this DUV system, same thing with J4LP and 9GY, they had a little dead-end system with mining and ratting. It was surprising at how often I would log in, check the station, and then warp to 10K off the DUV gate, and then slowly approach and get about 2.5K off. So I'm still cloaked, but I'm within jump range. And I was shocked at how often I would then sit on this gate and see ships start to jump out. Mining barges, haulers, combat ships. So they're in the system, and their idea of get safe wasn't to go to the pause they had in the system. It was to go to the gate, jump out, and warp to the station in EF and dock, which is exploitable in many ways. So basically I could have put a stop bubble here on the station so that it catches that warp, and I could have killed them there. But then you run the risk that someone outside the station is going to let them know, and it takes a while to set up a bubble. So the easier way is just to sit on the gate. You don't have to be cloaked. Just go sit on the gate uncloaked so you don't have the locking delay of uncloaking, and kill them that way. Another way I would do it is I would go into DUV, and then I would try to catch them in their anomalies, their mining anomalies. Most of the time I didn't, because it's a pretty big system, and it was usually like a 40, 50 AU warp for me to get to where they were mining. But what I found was that I would come into system and they would immediately warp to the EF gate. So I would warp to the anomaly, see that they were all gone already or just miss a few of them, and then I'd immediately come back to EF and I'd do the same thing. I'd catch them all as they jumped in. So that's a good way to catch mostly miners and haulers, but also some combat ships. Some people have said things to me like, aren't you above killing miners? Aren't you above killing haulers, killing sinos? And, I've had people say, I thought you were better than that. What these people don't understand is EVE is not a game so much about, hey, look at me, I'm special, I'm only going to fight the hard fights. Because it doesn't work like that. You can't just choose to fight the hard fights. And in general, this group of people would not fight me. They refused to fight me 90% of the time, except when they would set up a camp that was really more than I could fight in most cases, not all. And so the only way I could get good fights out of them was to attack their miners, their haulers. And keep in mind, I'm there to harass them and demoralize them, not because I dislike them, but because that's the purpose of the video. So if you have an enemy in the game, and a lot of people in this game have arch enemies in the game. I used to with my group, but the group that we were enemies with is long since gone. And even the group that I was in when we did have the enemy is gone. So if you have an arch enemy in the game, or if you're just trying to destabilize a region so that you can go in and take it with the new Fozzie Sov, harassing a group like this, killing their miners, killing their haulers, killing their sinos, doing every bit of damage you can do to them is good. And nothing is below you. You're not better than anything. I'm not better than any kill in the game. I will kill your rookie ship. I will kill an empty pod. I will kill everything. Because, for one, there's a chance it'll get me a fight. It might escalate. If I tackle a procurer on a gate, and I've had this happen, the guy's alt might warp in with his alt with a Augur Navy issue, which happened when I was in a Tyrannus. I almost killed both the hauler and the Augur Navy issue, but he was able to jump through the gate and escape me. You've got to get the escalations. The only way to do it is just to really piss people off. But do it in a nice way. I try not to smack talk. I'm nice to people, but I am going to cause as much damage as I possibly can to them, because that's my job in the game. So, you're there to harass them. You want to cause damage, and you can do that by killing stuff like I was just talking about. Catch them as they're coming, going gate to gate. Even when I was bored, a great way to catch people would be to sit on the 3-IN or the DUV or the GRNJ gate, depending on where they were. So if I jumped into GRNJ and saw there was 20 people in local or 10 people, I would often sit in EF and just wait. Because if they're running, let's say you have 8 people running a site. One dude, his wife says he's got to go take out the trash. And he decides, okay, I'm going to go dock up in EF. He warps to the gate, jumps in, and oops, he's dead because he's by himself and all his buddies are still in the site. Or one dude just has to go to bed. It's the end of his night, he's got to leave. So oftentimes you'll find people who separate themselves from their fleet. And since you're by yourself and you're outnumbered, those are your opportunities to get kills. Beyond that, you have your basic, the standard ways of getting kills. The standard ways of getting kills are check the belts. Use your directional scanner. If you see a Raven on scan, there's a chance it's in a belt. It's probably in a pause, but there's a chance. As you'll see in EF here, I killed a Raven. It was in a belt. Don't know why, but it was in a belt. So it was in a belt ratting, and you'll catch targets ratting like that if you're in their home system, because they just do it. And there's not much sense in ratting anymore, and instead of doing anomalies, which are better, but people still do it. So check the belts, check the anomalies, check the combat sites. If you have an alt, like I talk about in another video, if you have an alt, it's really nice to have combat or core scanner probes on that alt. Sometimes what I would do with my alt is I would scan down all the combat sites, all the signatures, not just combat sites, ahead of time. Like when I first logged in, Then I'd go AFK and work on the website or watch TV, do whatever. And I'd come back an hour later and I'd see somebody on scan out in the middle of nowhere, and I'd already have that bookmark. So he never saw my combat pros out. I just warped directly to him. No big deal. I already had his sight. Which brings me to the next point. So probably the biggest thing you can do to damage morale and damage your enemy when you're harassing them like this in their home. It's got to be a group that spends a lot of time ratting and mining. Like if you were to come do this in my alliance's home system, we just wouldn't care. It would be you might get some kills. You probably would. But in general, we wouldn't care because most of us don't spend a whole lot of time mining or ratting in that area. We do have miners in my alliance, but they rat somewhere else and far away from our deployment area. And some people do run combat sites, but they typically don't run it in our home system. We go into Fountain or Cloud Ring, whatever. So for more PvP-oriented groups, it's less effective. But for most of the bigger alliances that hold SOV, it works. It'll work against goons. It'll work against Space Monkeys, J4LP. I can't think of anybody else at the moment. CVA, if they're still alive. All those different people. Because even the people who maybe have some competent PvPers still have a lot of Care Bears who are trying to fund their PvP. So, probably the most effective thing you can do is go AFK in their system. And what that means is basically, I'll just give you an example of how I do it. A lot of times I will log in to the game at 3 or 4 p.m. My time. And I can't play at that time. I'm busy doing other stuff, and I usually can't play until 9 or 10 o'clock at night. But I'll just log in at 3 or 12 noon or whenever I have the chance. I'll just log in. And if I have a few minutes when I first log in, I'll try to get a kill when I first log in, because that's one of your best opportunities. They'll probably be out and about when you first log in. So try to get that first kill. If you can't, go to a safe spot, cloak up, go AFK. So let's say I logged in at 3 p.m. Haven't been there, haven't even looked at the game in 7 hours, and now it's 10 p.m. I'm playing the game. I come back. They've sat there in that system, and most of them have gone to the surrounding systems to try to rat and mine because they're too scared to do it in this system. I've effectively closed down one system to their ratting and mining. Now, the good part is that these people then get a little rebellious after they start getting frustrated. Is they get rebellious and they start saying, well, this guy's AFK, and you can even rub it in their face and say, all right, guys, I'm going to go see a movie, or, you know what, I'm going out of town for the rest of the day, or whatever, and just, rub it in their faces and make them feel a little bit bad about it. But let them know you're going to be AFK a lot. So then they have to gamble at when you're there and when you're not. Most of the time, they're not going to take the risk. They're going to be too scared to use their own assets and to profit from the system that they control. You will shut down their home system. The ones who think, oh, well, I'm a tough guy and I can go out, you'll come back to your computer after you're done doing whatever you're doing, and you'll see them in a belt, anomaly, whatever. 99% of the time, if you've been AFK for more than a couple hours and you see somebody out, they're not bait. Right? So people don't bait. They don't have the will to bait for more than about 30 minutes at a time before they give up in general. So that's another thing you're going to face a lot when you're living in someone else's system, whether you can dock or not. You can dock in EF, but not in Cloud Ring where I was. So, in the other spot that I was. So, in general, the way bait works when you're doing this, after you get a kill, the enemy will almost always send out a bait ship. I like to call it the revenge bait. So basically, whenever you piss them off, they will try to bait you. And it's really, if you're paying attention, it's really not hard to know which ships are bait. I mean, if a hauler comes to a gate 10 minutes after you just killed a mining barge on that gate, and there's plenty of people in system, and you've seen a couple people undock and redock from the station and stuff, then you have a good idea that it might be a bait hauler. But being a kitey Pilgrim, you can probably orbit at 20k, because that's the whole idea, is that you can escape at all times, and just give it a shot. But still know when it's bait. Like you'll see another video, I think, I killed a Sino, and then they immediately brought out another Sino, and I knew that he was bait, so I went and engaged, but I engaged from like 50k away because I knew that they were all going to undock. And what do you know, they all undock. So be ready for them to bait you, because that's their primary response and tactic to countering you, is bait. And they will try really, really hard to bait you. Most of the time, it's kind of silly. It's so obvious that it's ridiculous. So that's basically what it's like to just camp out in someone's home system, harass them, make their lives very unenjoyable, their game lives, so that the game no longer becomes fun for them. I mean, there was a quote from someone in the game that says that the only way to win a war in EVE Online is to demoralize your opponents. You can't win by blowing up all their stuff. Attrition doesn't work very well in EVE, unfortunately, because in EVE people have the ability to avoid consequences like they are in real life. So in EVE, if someone gets frustrated and they've just lost all their ships, they can go buy a Plex from CCP, and they can sell that Plex, and right now it's almost 1 billion ISK. Get 1 billion ISK and buy a whole new fleet of ships and have it jumped in by Black Frog. So you can't really win the war by attrition, and you have to keep in mind that people who play EVE are typically tech professionals. I think the basic demographic is that between the ages of 22 and 34, tech professionals in the IT line of work. So, you know, a $15 Plex is not going to be a big deal to these people. So attrition isn't going to work. Not to mention the fact that they don't have to obey the same rules as real life. They can have a PvP character here in nullsec, and then over in highsec, they can have a mining character, a missioning character. We have people in our alliance, or used to. It caused some conflict. But we used to have people in our alliance who did their PvP in our alliance, but then would join the big SOV alliances to make ISK. So you'd have someone who was in, I forget their name, down in the southeast of EVE, whatever that is. But anyways, they're a SOV alliance, and they were a member of the alliance in one of their alt accounts, but all that account did was run combat sites, mine, industry, etc. It was just an ISK making account while they did the PvP with my alliance. So shutting down the system, it's going to demoralize them, because they can't play the game they want to play, and they're going to be forced to look for other options. But you will not make them quit logging in, which is your goal. You want to make them stop logging into the game or leave this alliance and go elsewhere. And you can't do that with just attrition alone. You have to demoralize them, make them feel like they can't play the game anymore. Every time they undock, they're in danger. If they try to move something, they die. They just start to lose their morale, and it becomes not fun for them anymore. So that's basic harassment. Now let's move on, because I'm talking too much about one thing and probably repeating myself 100 times. Alright, so next up, let's talk about roaming and in general just PvP. So the first thing I want to talk about is pipe systems. So pipe systems. They have one entrance and one exit. In these systems, so long as this distance here is greater than 15 AU, and ideally much longer than that, these are ideal systems to camp. So what I do when I fly the Pilgrim is I keep a bubble in my cargo hold, a small Tech 1 or Tech 2, and I will do drag, or actually stop bubbles on the gates. So if I find a pipe that looks like it's pretty well traveled, look at the map and see jumps per hour. If it's got good jumps per hour, I consider good jumps per hour at least 60. And, you know, oftentimes if it's just a slow night, I'll settle for more than 30. So 30 to 60 or more jumps per hour. Try to guess what direction will be the prevalent direction, which one. Most people are going to be going that way, right? You assume because maybe it's the end of the night and they're headed back to high sec or something like that, or maybe there was a big fight over here, and as a result a lot of pods and defeated ships are going to be making it home one by one by going this way. So things like that, that's actually one of the best situations I've found, was when there was a big fight and I just camped the pipe and there's just non-stop kills coming in at me. I just pods, rookie ships, combat ships by themselves, you know, cruisers and battle cruisers, even a battleship. So that's a good way to do it. Find a pipe system and do a bubble. Bubble camping with the Pilgrim is really awesome. What I'll do, let me do this better here, is I will set up on a gate. Let's do that as a gate graphic, okay? And then let's do that as the bubble. I will set up my bubble, and I will set up a can right in front of that bubble in the direction of the out gate, of the in gate actually. This is the out gate. So in and out. And that didn't work. Separate these things. Okay, so in and out. And then this is in the direction. So I would set up the can right here, and then I, represented as a diagonal for the Pilgrim, I would sit right here, about 10 kilometers. That's a bad K. About 10 kilometers off the can. I would also have a tactical, usually above the gate, 2 to 300 K above the gate. So having that tactical is huge, because what you can do is you can bounce back and forth, and you can also bounce to the gate. So sometimes you're going to see the need to quickly get from here to here, but this is 100K. So what you've done is you've warped from the in gate to the out gate at 100 kilometers, dropped your bubble, dropped your can, and created a tactical 220K up. Sit there for 30 minutes, an hour, however long you want. Having the tactical allows you to easily avoid your own bubble and to bounce to the gate and back, and to get safe. If there's like a 50-man fleet coming through, you just bounce up to your tactical cloaked and you stay there. But the value of having your ship cloaked, being in a Pilgrim, 10K off the bubble, is that people will be coming in, running their scan, and they won't see you there. So because they don't see you, they're going to be more surprised, and you're going to have a little bit of a jump on them. Also, they're more likely to burn through the bubble to get to the out gate, which means they're bubbling themselves, and you're more likely to get the pod. Typically what I'll do is I'll wait until they show up on D-scan, and as soon as they show up on D-scan, I will uncloak, which means most likely, at most, they'll get me on one scan like a second or two before they land. But that gives me a chance to wait out that 6-second lock delay after you uncloak. Because when you uncloak your Pilgrim, you've got roughly 6 seconds before you can lock anything. And it's best. I've lost several targets because I waited too long to uncloak, where they would hit the bubble and immediately warp off. So I wasn't able to lock them fast enough due to the cloak delay. So that's one way to get kills when you're out there. Just camp. You'll see me doing that in a lot of videos, because it's a very solid, easy way to get steady kills. The next way to do it is to do something that's basically the complete opposite of this, and try to erase that and that. Alright, so let's say that you are coming, and this outgate here is high sec. So that's high sec right there. You jump into a system, and there's only one person in system. Oftentimes, I will completely disregard the fact that there's most likely a bubble, because if you're in null sec and you're warping to a high sec gate, there's almost always a bubble. And if there's people in the system, chances are they're camping that bubble. If it's just one person, the Pilgrim is well set up that you can, if not defeat almost every other solo ship in the game, you can escape from it. So, as you'll see in one of my videos, I just, without any regard for what's in the bubble, I have a good idea something's there, so I warp. It ends up being a wolf. Taken by complete surprise. Uncloak right before I come out of warp. He had no idea I was coming, and boom, just killed him pretty easy. I think he killed some of my drones and irritated me, but I was able to kill him, and that's another good way to get kills. So as you're roaming around, look for bubble camps. I'd say almost half the time, bubble camps in nullsec are frigates, and the Pilgrim eats frigates for lunch. So you can take on 2, 3, 4, 5 frigates at a time if you do it right using the running fight tactic that I talked about before. Other things to do when you're roaming is don't be afraid to go really, really deep into nullsec. Go behind enemy lines, because that's where the best kills are. Behind enemy lines, you're going to find more ratters, more miners, more careless people going gate to gate without scouts. That's where you're going to find a lot of kills that you wouldn't have normally found. And one way to express that is to say that the deeper you go into nullsec, the easier Eve becomes, because the more careless the pilots become in general. So if you're like in Syndicate on the PF gate, they're going to be usually decent pilots there. If you go out into deep Declan or the drone regions, they're pretty terrible. They don't know what they're doing. They're Care Bears. They're careless. They don't use intel. They don't pay attention. They're watching TV while they're playing the game, etc. They feel safe being that far out. So the further out you go, the safer they feel, and the easier they are to catch. Now, the last couple things to talk about, because this video is going a little bit long, the last couple things to talk about before we wrap this up is what to avoid and what are the good targets and what are the bad targets. And I'll try to do maybe some kind of a cheat sheet, but it's hard to do a complete cheat sheet. So I'll just kind of see if I can do something to give some generalizations. But here's the basics. Drone boats are bad. Missile boats are bad. Things that can hit you at distance for full DPS are bad. And those are drone boats and missile boats. Ideally, those things that you cannot deactivate with your newts. So I typically avoid Ishtars and Vector Navy issues. You can kill some Vector Navy issues, but it's really a close one. And if you have a decent skilled Vector Navy issue with a decent fit, he's either going to run you off or kill you. So it's not worth it in most cases. Be careful with Caracals. Caracals, you can kill 90% of them. However, if they have rapid light missile launchers, that first salvo or whatever, that first clip of missiles that comes out really fast, it's going to do considerable damage. It's going to put you at below 50% shields, and you're probably going to freak out and think that you're going to lose the fight. But keep in mind, it's a Caracal, and once he gets that first load of missiles, I don't know the right term for it, once he gets that first set of missiles into you, he's got a really long reload time, and you've pretty much, his DPS is done for the rest of the fight. All he has after that point is his drones. So 1 Caracal, you're okay, but be careful, stay at range. 2 Caracals, you probably shouldn't do it. Bigger missile boats, with some discretion. I have killed the Raven, other stuff like that. It depends a lot on character age, fittings, what they have fitted. If they have rapid heavies, that's more dangerous than if they have torpedoes or cruise missiles. So getting to know the models and being able to look at your enemy before you uncloak and engage is a real asset that I encourage. But in general, things that can do good damage to you at 20k, and you can't turn them off. So the things that are good targets for you are the opposite. Things that don't do as good damage at range. So a blaster thorax, for example, is pretty much an ideal target. Not only can his blasters not touch you at 20k, 18k, I orbit at 18k when I'm in the Pilgrim usually, or 18.5. Not only can his turrets, his blasters not touch you, even with null they would just be barely scratching you, but you can turn off his blasters and make it so he can't even run his guns. Same thing with the Brutix. Same thing with, let's see, a Megathron, should you ever by some magical way find one, which they're pretty rare these days, especially solo. Megathron, MOA. MOA's going to be using blasters, sometimes rails, mostly blasters. But again, even if you got a rail MOA with rail guns, you can turn those off. No big deal. Let's say you go up against a Zealot. That Zealot is going to pound you really hard for about the first 13 seconds. And then he's going to go cap dead. And you're going to have about 50% shield, and he will never get off another shot of his guns for the rest of the fight, because he's got medium pulse lasers. So medium pulse, medium beam, any kind of lasers. Those are even more cap hungry than blasters and railguns. So with those, easy targets, those are ideal. Anything that uses lasers. So a good way to tell is just to look at the ship. Look at their ship in space, and you can see what they have fit. If you're not really sure what kind of stuff that ship fits, don't be afraid to check info. I still check info on ships to find out what their bonuses are sometimes, what their resist holes are, their natural resist holes. It's not bad to do. You always, when you're cloaked, have time to do it. Right? It's an extra 2 seconds to look at their info. Usually isn't going to make the difference of whether or not you get the target. It's better to be more prepared. Now, the final thing I'll say is that your biggest advantage in the Pilgrim, beyond being able to stay at range, beyond the good drone damage that's flexible across almost any size of ship, like there's not ships that are too small, there's not ships that are too big. You do good damage to them all. Your biggest advantage in the Pilgrim is your energy neutralizers. And so what this entire tactics lecture boils down to is really get familiar with your energy neutralizers and get very good at cycling them, staggering them, distributing them across targets, and prioritizing which targets they go to. Don't be afraid to overload them when things get a little bit heated, because you can overload them for a reasonable amount of time. And that's going to give, I don't know if the overload's cycle time or amount. I believe it's cycle time. But your energy neutralizers in the Pilgrim are your greatest asset, that and being able to cloak. So pick your fights well. Don't take stupid fights. Don't take bait. Pick your fights well. Make the most out of your energy neutralizers. And I think that if you do that, that just like I found, you'll find that the Pilgrim is really the new king of solo PvP.